February 1934. The glaring lights of the Berlin Motor Show are beaming down on rows of highly polished luxury automobiles. But Adolf Hitler is at the podium, and he's pitching a completely different prospect: a simple, affordable car for ordinary households. A machine that would eventually, and almost unimaginably, go on to sell over 21 million units worldwide.
It's a story defined by a sweeping, almost unbelievable irony. We're tracking the complete transformation of a vehicle born directly out of regime propaganda into one of the most beloved, globally recognized cultural icons in automotive history.
And it all kicked off with what was heavily promoted as the People's Car Project. The legendary Ferdinand Porsche was handed this incredibly monumental engineering assignment.
In 1934, Porsche landed a strict, state-directed contract to build a highly efficient family car. Now, his team didn't just invent every single concept from scratch. Between 1935 and 1937, they brilliantly combined existing European engineering ideas, like an air-cooled flat four-rear engine and independent suspension, and put their experimental W30 prototypes through incredibly rigorous road tests. By May 1938, when the factory cornerstone was finally laid, they had locked in that instantly recognizable, highly aerodynamic sloping shape.
But the entire purchase plan was built on sheer deception. The promise to civilians was a stamp saving scheme. Ordinary families could literally buy stamps out of their wages to reserve their place in the delivery line, and hundreds of thousands of people bought into it. But the wartime reality? It was starkly different. When the war began in September 1939, mass civilian deliveries completely vanished. Not a single civilian saver ever actually received their promised car.
Instead, that enormous, state-of-the-art factory was swallowed whole by a grim era of war, ruin, and labor.
Before passenger car production could even really start, the new works transformed into a military plan. They turned out angular, rugged military vehicles, like the Kübelwagen and the amphibious Schwinnwagen, using those core Volkswagen components. And to keep this machine moving, the factory relied heavily on forced laborers, brought in from occupied countries and camps, all operating under brutal, highly coercive conditions. By 1945, after being targeted by massive air raids, this colossal project was reduced to a vast, battered, heavily damaged industrial ruin. But here is where the history of this vehicle takes a massive, completely unexpected turn, leading right into a British rescue mission. Because you have to wonder, how exactly does a bombed-out, ruined enemy factory survive at all? You'd probably assume some remnant of the German government salvaged it, but in a total twist of fate, the regime's prized project wasn't saved by Germany. It was actually saved by their enemy. When American forces rolled in around April 1945, the town was quickly renamed Wolfsburg, entirely stripping away its former Nazi affiliations. Soon after, it passed into the British occupation zone, and the British military desperately needed transport. Enter British officer Major Ivan Hirst, who arrived to supervise this ruined plant. Amidst these crazy supply shortages, Hirst and the remaining German staff managed to organize repairs and salvage whatever machinery they could find. But what actually threw a lifeline to the factory was a staggering 20,000 car order from the British Army itself. It gave the ruined plant an immediate purpose and, crucially, actual customers. That single lifeline set the stage for post-war German recovery and what can only be described as a miraculous commercial revival. Despite a nearly paralyzing post-war shortage of coal, steel, reliable power, and even tires, the factory's output remarkably hit 1,000 vehicles a month by 1946. It was a phenomenal, almost unthinkable feat of industrial resurrection. Riding that momentum, a former Opel executive named Heinz Nordhoff took charge in 1948, and Nordhoff made a crucial, game-changing decision. He focused the entire company's energy on this one basic, incredibly durable car. He ramped up assembly standards and built out a massive after-sales support network. Exports to the Netherlands had already kicked off in 1947, and by 1949, the very first Volkswagens were hitting the shores of the United States. Under Nordhoff's watch, this little rear-engined car completely shed its dark, militaristic origins to become the ultimate symbol of practical West German post-war recovery. But as those rising exports turned Wolfsburg into a global production powerhouse through the 1950s and 60s, the car took on a completely new life across the Atlantic. It became a true counterculture advertising icon. In the US market, which at the time was absolutely dominated by massive, flashy, chrome-drenched land yachts, the Beetle was a bizarre outlier. So in 1959,
the Doyle Dane Bernbach agency launched the legendary Think Small ad campaign. They went totally against the grain, using vast, spacious layouts paired with restrained, unglamorous black and white photographs, and topped the whole thing off with dry, self-deprecating copy. They basically took the Beetle's oddity and small size and framed them as highly intelligent, distinct advantages. And that brings us to the second, wildly unbelievable irony of this story. On one hand, you have a machine engineered under strict, state-directed, authoritarian origins. But on the other hand, that exact same vehicle was wholeheartedly adopted by American students, artists, and counterculture drivers in the 1960s. They were painting them with bright flowers and wild personal decorations. The ultimate, rigid, state-sponsored machine was somehow transformed into the ultimate symbol of freewheeling, anti-establishment expression. Its commercial and cultural success was so staggering that in 1972, cumulative production of the original Beetle actually surpassed the seemingly unbeatable record of the Ford Model T, a staggering achievement that leads us right up to the final Mexican milestone.
Because production eventually had to shift, Wolfsburg ended its saloon production in 1974 to make way for the front-engined Golf. Emden stopped in 78, and Carmen Cabriolets ended in 1980. But the Type 1 wasn't done. It lived on abroad, evolving in places like Brazil and especially Mexico, adapting to local regulations while perfectly preserving that classic rounded body. It thrived there for decades, surviving right up until tighter rules and declining sales finally closed the curtains in July 2003, when the final original Type 1 rolled off the line in Puebla. The very last of those 21 million vehicles was preserved and shipped all the way back across the Atlantic. Today, a pale blue sedan sits quietly on white wall tires, its curved fenders reflecting silently in the polished floor of the Wolfsburg Museum.